Russia never thought it would have to worry about how it deployed its air defenses on its own territory. Why would it? When Vladimir Putin launched his Ukraine invasion in February 2022, Ukraine didn't have the means to launch strikes against Russia. Even if Ukraine did, it wouldn't matter, as the special military operation would be wrapped up in a matter of days. But the operation failed, and now, nearly 4 years into the war, Ukraine's long-range strikes have become almost as frequent and are far more precise than those that Russia launches. Russia is starting to feel the pain. The country's air defenses have collapsed as Putin has lost control over his own skies. That's the opinion of Yevhen Diki, who is the former commander of a company in Ukraine's Aidar battalion. During an interview with Ukrainian outlet Radio NV, Diki said that the winter of 2025 would represent a first for Russia. After spending the entire war maintaining an advantage over Ukraine in terms of the strength and scale of its air defenses, Russia is about to find out that Ukraine has pared those defenses down to the point where they are a shadow of what they used to be. This will be the first symmetric winter of the war, Diki says, and Ukraine is already proving it with the size, scale, and success of the long-range strikes that it has conducted throughout 2025. November 25th saw Euromaidan Press report on the key comments that Diki made during his interview, with the headline statement being, "But this will be the first symmetric winter, and here we will see how they handle it with the same unbreakable resolve that we have been facing for 4 years." Diki is implying that Russia's air defenses are now so limited that they are intercepting Ukraine's long-range munitions at about the same rate as Ukraine is intercepting what Russia sends its way. And proof of that, the former commander says, lies in the Moscow oblast itself. It's no coincidence that Ukrainian drones now operate systematically inside Moscow, Diki claimed. And it's also not a coincidence that this claim came at around the same time as Ukraine managed to pull off another successful strike against a Russian oil refinery located in Moscow. Just 2 days before Euromaidan Press published its report, Reuters said that Ukraine had managed to send its drones deep into the heart of a power and heat station in the Moscow region. The Ukrainian strike, which targeted the Shatora power station that is just 120 kilometers or around 75 miles east of the Kremlin, caused a fire and forced the deployment of mobile heating units as the station switched to backup power. In a rare instance of transparency, the Moscow regional governor, Andrei Vorobyov, confirmed Ukraine's strike, though he trotted out the old drone debris excuse that we've heard 1,000 times before. Some of the drones were destroyed by air defense forces. Several fell on the territory of the station. A fire broke out at the facility. Now it's localized, Vorobyov claimed. It's amazing how much damage Ukraine's drone debris can do. After all, that debris was apparently widespread enough to cause 3 of the Shatora station's transformers to catch fire. Each of those transformers measures about 65 square meters, or around 670 square feet, which sounds like the sort of target size that would require an entire drone to score a direct hit, not debris. The attack was the latest in a series of strikes on the Moscow oblast that have left the region's residents without heat or electricity. Earlier in November, RBC Ukraine reported that October 31st saw much of the Moscow oblast plunged into darkness, likely as a result of Ukrainian strikes on power facilities. Videos and photographs emerged on the social media platform Telegram, showing streets plunged into complete darkness. Russia provided no comment on what had happened, with the only news emerging from local media that claimed the power outage was caused by an emergency situation in the power grid. Russia has tried to play this off as a localized emergency that has nothing to do with Ukraine. However, RBC Ukraine points out that drones were seen approaching Moscow in the hours before the city experienced its blackout. It doesn't take Einstein to complete this equation. Ukrainian drones plus failing Russian air defenses equals a blackout in Moscow. When Diki says that it isn't a coincidence that Moscow is experiencing so many problems, these 2 incidents, combined with many more across Russia, prove that the air defense symmetry that the former commander claims is now here isn't hyperbole, it's reality. And as The Independent reported on November 5th, the continued success of Ukraine's long-range strikes against targets deep inside Russia is becoming a major source of embarrassment for the Kremlin. The outlet published its piece in the aftermath of a drone strike that penetrated 1,300 kilometers or about 800 miles deep into Russia. It says, "These audacious strikes utilizing domestically produced drones have caused considerable embarrassment for Moscow, with officials often reticent about any damage, and have unnerved the Russian populace. Ukraine has increasingly aimed at manufacturing plants, oil refineries, and military logistics hubs in an effort to disrupt Russia's war machine, nearly 4 years after the full-scale invasion began." The mention of domestically produced drones is important. We mentioned in the introduction to this video that Russia never expected Ukraine to be able to strike it on its home turf. That was a reasonable expectation in February 2022, when Ukraine essentially had no missiles and its drones were still in their formative stages. Fast forward almost 4 years, and Ukraine is now at the point where it's building around 4 million drones annually, including an estimated 30,000 long-range drones. Add emerging missiles such as the Neptune, and Ukraine has a growing pile of long-range weapons that it can use to launch precision strikes against Moscow and other Russian territories. However, it's not just precision that has led to the symmetry. The sheer scale of Ukraine's drone production is allowing the country to utilize the same tactics that Russia has used against Ukraine to overwhelm the dwindling stockpiles of air defenses that Russia has left. Diki says that this fact is key to the leveling out of the air defense aspect of the war. This is exactly what they do to us. We've managed to exhaust their air defenses to the point where they physically cannot cope, the former commander told MV Radio, per Euromaidan Press. Diki is certainly right about Russia's strategy of overwhelming Ukraine's air defenses. That strategy was working so well earlier in 2025 that it prompted the Atlantic Council to publish a July article in which it claimed that Russia was now winning the drone war after overwhelming Ukraine's defenses. Russia's greater resources had finally caught up to the constant innovation of Ukraine's tech center, the outlet claimed, and the results were starting to show themselves. Russia is now producing far more drones and has developed new models incorporating a range of technological upgrades. This is making it possible to launch massive bombardments of Ukrainian cities that overwhelm Ukraine's limited air defenses and terrorize the civilian population, the Atlantic Council said. Quantity has certainly been an issue that Ukraine has struggled to deal with during the latter half of 2025. On November 14th, Defense Security Monitor reported that Russia launched around 5,300 drones at Ukraine, which amounts to an average of 171 drones per day. Ukraine's air defenses couldn't handle that quantity as well as they had before. They still shot down more than 4,200 of Russia's drones, the monitor points out, but that only adds up to an 80% interception rate, which is the lowest that Ukraine has achieved in any month during 2025. Russia's use of more drones has been getting results, but Diki claims that Ukraine is responding in kind and has proven that Russia's air defenses are just as susceptible to hordes of unmanned aerial vehicles. The signs are certainly there that he's correct. On October 27th, UA Wire claimed that Russia had created a new air defense perimeter around Moscow during the previous 2 months. That perimeter includes the creation of 21 sites located up to 50 kilometers or around 31 miles away from the city of Moscow itself. The heaviest concentration of these defenses lies to the south of Moscow city, with 80% of the new defenses being set up in that region. Russia's Pantsir, S-300 and S-400s make up the majority of these defenses, with radar and electronic warfare devices supplementing those systems' firepower. Another ring of air defenses, this one set up around Putin's Valdai residence, includes 13 Pantsirs, an S-400 and a radar. Those are some impressive defenses. However, most are focused on defending the city of Moscow rather than the oblast that contains the city. And it's here where we start to see Russia's air defense problems come to light. Both of the strikes we discussed earlier in the video happened in the Moscow oblast, albeit outside of the range of this new series of defenses. Putin is so concerned with protecting himself and Russia's capital that he appears to have forgotten that the Moscow oblast measures over 44,000 square kilometers, or almost 17,000 square miles. The city of Moscow accounts for just 2,511 of those square kilometers, or just 5,891 if you want to include the Moscow urban area. That's less than an eighth of the Moscow oblast that Russia's new air defenses cover, and that makes Moscow, outside of the city that shares its name with the region, extremely vulnerable. We just suggested that Putin is only concerned with protecting himself and Russia's capital. But maybe the reason why Moscow's defenses are so focused on those two things, leaving everything else in the oblast vulnerable, is more practical than that. Russia may simply not have enough air defenses to cover the entire region. And it's not just air defense systems that are running low in Russia. The surface-to-air missiles, or SAMs, that those systems require are also nearly exhausted. Diki claims that some of those SAMs come from North Korea and Russia can't rely on them to work properly. North Korean SAMs are not something Russia can rely on, and fall hasn't even ended yet, the commander claims. That's not a huge surprise, as SAMs are far more complex weapons than the artillery shells that North Korea has provided to Russia in the millions. Not that those shells are much better, by the way. Many are so rotten that Russia can't even use them, as you'll discover if you check out our video. Unable to rely on North Korea to provide the missiles that it needs, Russia is on the verge of running out of those missiles altogether. As according to Dr. Jack Watlin of the Royal United Services Institute, who says that Russia will likely be out of air defense missiles by February of 2026. It will restock as it has done before, but until that time comes, Ukraine has a window of opportunity available to it. It will be able to exploit Russia's shortages and weaknesses to hit a growing number of targets and put pressure on Russian industry, Watling says. Ukraine is doing that now. How much worse will it get for Putin and Moscow when the missiles run dry? As the missile crisis looms, Russia is also losing air defense systems in Ukraine and the occupied territories at an alarming rate. Ukraine's General Staff of the Armed Forces claims that its country's forces have destroyed 1,200 anti-aircraft warfare systems up to November 25th, with 2 of those systems being taken out just 1 day before. This is a huge rate of attrition, and it means that Russia keeps having to divert air defenses that were once stationed on its territory into Ukraine. The more of those defenses that have to make the journey into the more dangerous territory, the fewer that Russia has to deal with Ukraine's long-range drones inside Russia. The Kyiv Independent highlights Russia's problems bluntly. A November 9th article published by the Ukrainian outlet blares that Russia's air defenses are wide open. It says that Ukraine's many refinery strikes have bled Russia so dry of the fuel that those refineries produce that Putin has signed a law that allows Russian reservists to defend such critical infrastructure from Ukraine's drones. How those reservists are expected to do that when the air defense systems designed for this purpose can't destroy Ukraine's drones isn't clear. However, the Kyiv Independent suggests that the troops will end up manning truck-mounted machine guns from which they'll try to shoot Ukraine's drones out of the sky. Think about that for a moment. Before the war began, Russia seemed to have one of the most impressive air defense setups in the world. Now it's run so low on air defense units and missiles that it's been reduced to having soldiers point guns into the sky in the hope they might be able to rattle off lucky shots that take Ukraine's drones out. This situation can only mean bad things for the future of Russia's oil refineries, energy infrastructure, and the many other military targets that Ukraine has already been picking off. After all, if Diki is correct, air defense symmetry has already been achieved. Russia has been brought down to Ukraine's level after holding the advantage for almost 4 years. If things keep going the way they are, which means Russia continues to lose air defense systems to Ukraine's many drones, we could even reach a point where Russia is less able to protect its territory from long-range unmanned aerial vehicles than Ukraine. Leaks have sprung, the National Security Journal claims in a November 11th article, and Ukraine has been exploiting them throughout the year. The numbers alone make for terrible reading if you're Putin. The journal claims that Ukraine has racked up almost 160 successful strikes on Russia's oil refineries and other critical sites alone, which is an average of 16 strikes per month, assuming the figures are from the period between January and October. Among many other issues, the refinery strikes alone have led to Russia absorbing a 37% hit in its refining capacity, which has led to domestic fuel shortages and export bans. This is a situation that has been a long time in the making, with the journal stating, "Analysts say years of losses, redeployments and corruption have thinned Russia's air defenses, leaving gaps beyond the front line. Those gaps are what's making Ukraine's long-range strikes possible. Once Ukraine's drones make it past the frontline air defenses that Russia is using to protect the soldiers occupying Ukraine, they have often relatively clear paths until they get to their targets in Russian territory. And even once the drones reach those targets, the air defenses Russia has in place, assuming it has any at all, aren't doing a good job of dealing with the projectiles." United 24 Media published an interesting report on November 22nd that focused solely on the deep strikes Ukraine has carried out using its FP-1 drones and FP-5 aerial rocket system. The former, which is a long-range drone developed by a company called Firepoint, has been the standout performer for Ukraine in 2025, as it's the platform the country has most frequently used for its confirmed long-range strikes against Russia. Combined with the FP-5, FP-1 has scored 8 hits on Russia's energy infrastructure, 15 hits on air defenses, radars and other military equipment, 6 hits on industrial facilities and factories, 7 hits on airfields, and an enormous 28 successful strikes on Russia's oil and gas infrastructure. So Russia doesn't just have an air defense problem. It has a specific drone problem, as this scale of successful strikes wouldn't be possible if Russia had any answers for the FP-1 drone and the FP-5 rocket system. Ukraine has also started using the FP-2. That gives the country a mid-range option that allows it to hit Russian targets inside occupied Ukraine but behind the front lines, as you'll learn if you check out our video covering the new weapon. The point we're making here is that the shortfall in Russia's air defenses is being exacerbated by Ukraine's innovation. While Ukraine's weapons manufacturers may be struggling to come up with the defensive systems to deal with Russia's overwhelming aerial attacks, they are at least ensuring Ukraine can repay Russia in kind with similarly powerful strikes that are doing a lot of damage. The National Security Journal builds on what we just mentioned about Russia's reservists being called into the fray, noting, Moscow's problem is that it has very little in the way of higher technology or sophisticated air defense systems that could have a meaningful impact. The most common and largely improvised Russian response is to create what it calls mobile air defense units. This generic term is supposed to hide the fact that these mobile units are just soldiers being driven around, manning machine guns and anti-aircraft guns. In a humiliating turn of events, an October 26th photograph showcasing one of these mobile teams parked near the Kremlin was published by Russia just as Moscow came under attack by Ukraine's drones. The machine guns didn't help then. And outside of the occasional lucky shot, there won't do much to stop Ukraine from turning Russia's own tactics against it. There is one caveat to everything we've discussed, and Euromaidan Press says that Diki covered it in his interview. Parity, symmetry, or whatever you want to call it in the air defense arena has been achieved by Ukraine taking out Russian air defenses, rather than strengthening its own. We see that from the falling interception rate, as we mentioned earlier. So the air defense battle becoming symmetrical doesn't mean that Ukraine is out of the woods. Far from it. Diki says that a very tough winter lies ahead as Russia hones its forces on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. These strikes have done enough to deprive millions of Ukrainian citizens of power at various points, and they've done a number on Ukraine's power generation capabilities. As Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty reports, Ukraine's energy ministry said in October that the country's generation capacity was about 17.6 gigawatts. That's not even half of the 38 gigawatts that it was before Putin launched his invasion. It also may not be enough to see Ukraine's citizens through a cold winter, during which consumption is expected to hit 18 gigawatts. Ukraine has to survive a tough winter to make what it has achieved on the air defense front pay off. But if there's anything that Ukraine has shown us during a war that has lasted far longer than anybody thought it would, it's that the country's people have an immense amount of willpower. They, along with Ukraine's military, will do everything that they can to pull through. And during it all, Ukraine's long-range drones will still be taking out key Russian targets by the bucket load. On a brighter note for Ukraine, it's just started to deploy a never-before-seen UK air defense system. The Terrahawk Paladin is on the ground in Ukraine and has been designed specifically to tackle Russia's long-range drones. Find out more about that weapon in our video, and remember to subscribe to the Military Show to see more coverage of the latest news from the Ukraine war. And thank you, as always, for watching.